My name is Renee Secor. I'm the Carnivore Conservation Director here at Project Coyote. I oversee all of our programmatic and campaign work focused on our mission of protecting North American wild carnivores, and promoting compassionate coexistence through education, science, advocacy, and coalition building. We're so thrilled that you've joined us for Wolf Awareness Week and get to kick it off with us this week. This is a week that's dedicated to honoring wolves for their ecological and intrinsic worth and raising awareness on the continued threats and persecution that they face across North America. In addition to today's webinar, we'll have all week long, we will be sharing engaging social media content to honor this exceptional keystone species and highlighting the importance of taking action in their defense. We invite you to join us all week long as we celebrate and take action for wolves, starting with today's webinar. On a personal note, I personally fell in love with wolves while living in Montana and getting to visit as well as study in Yellowstone National Park, getting to witness firsthand wolves in the wild, which was really a life-changing experience for so many people, including myself. And now I get the privilege of getting to work to protect them with this great team at Project Coyote, and excited to share ways that you all can join in our advocacy and be an advocate for wolves. Just to reiterate a few of the housekeeping items. So please place any questions that you have into the Q&A feature. We'll be taking kind of collective action and engaging together at the second half of the webinar. So we might not have time to get to questions and answers live. So put those in the Q&A and we'll try to answer them throughout the webinar. And then I will pass it over to Christopher so he can introduce himself and kick us off.
Thank you so much, Renee. And again, thank you to everyone tuning into today's webinar to learn more about wolves and how we can act on their behalf. I've had the pleasure of working with Project Coyote as the Operations and Communications Director for the past 2 years, alongside Renee and the rest of our wonderful team, advocating for wolves and other wild carnivores. But my previous work has also included advocating for red wolves in my home state of North Carolina, as well as working for Wolf Park in Indiana, which is a wolf research and education center, where I had the immense privilege of actually seeing firsthand the individual personalities of wolves and the immense range of emotions that they express. And before we really launch into today's program, I do want to mention a few things that we have going on this week for wolves. So first, we have our annual float fundraiser campaign that is going on with limited edition wolf-themed apparel. And it features a wolf design by a Project Coyote supporter, Maeve Rogers, who is a Voyager's wolf project technician. And this apparel is only available for the next week, so be sure to order soon. It is a perfect way to raise awareness and appreciation for wolves in your own community, as well as support wolf protection efforts at the same time. And all proceeds go directly to our Wild Carnivore Legal Defense Fund. And typically, $8 from every item sold goes to Project Coyote. But thanks to a generous wolf advocate and long-term Project Coyote supporter, all donations this week, including proceeds from our float campaign, are matched dollar for dollar up to $5,000. So every float item sold really generates $16 for our Wild Carnivore Legal Defense Fund. And this fund provides essential legal support for our current lawsuits in defense of our nation's wolves. And with the recent announcement that the Biden administration is actually working against wolves, which we'll discuss later, we really need your help to ensure that we have the resources not only to defend wolves as our current lawsuits work their way through the court system, but also as new threats to wolves arise in the coming months and years. In addition to Renee and I being introduced in today's webinar, we also added wolves as part of our Project Coyote team. So I'm going to take just a few minutes to introduce who wolves are and how what we know about them as individuals should really inform our relationships with them. So wolves are sentient, feeling, and sapient thinking and self-aware beings. They are individuals that are complex with rich social lives, just like us. They have unique personalities that influence the direction of their pack, as well as each individual playing a critical role in their family pack structure. There's also deep emotional bonding that happens between family members, and that allows for complex cooperative behavior to happen, like hunting, pup rearing, and territory defense. And all of these cooperative behaviors kind of work together to create a self-regulated society or population of wolves. Wolves also have distinct pack cultures and individual uniqueness. So scientists have actually studied hunting behaviors in numerous areas, including Yellowstone National Park, and it's been observed that certain hunting strategies are actually passed down through observational learning from one generation to the next, and that there are differences between packs even in the same region, which is just fascinating, showing really just cultural behavior passed on. But wolves are also very unique as individuals as well as their pack. Scientists have also studied extensively their howls and have shown that individual wolves have unique howls, very similar to fingerprints almost with humans. So kind of like vocal fingerprints, every wolf has its own unique print. And howls are really a complex form of communication as well that are critical for their pack's survival and thriving social dynamics. And all of this is really just scratching the surface on what we know about wolves as unique families and individuals. So considering the overwhelming scientific evidence of wolf sentience, self-awareness, and culture, this really necessitates our consideration of their individual well-being and the prioritization of ethical human-wolf coexistence. So, despite everything we've just discussed, wolves once had quite a range across the United States. Their historic range was across most of North America, as you can see in the light orange color on this map. The red wolf would have occupied the southeast, that gray area from about Texas to Florida up into the lower parts of the Midwest. But a colonial and government-driven war against them nearly wiped them out, largely due to misconceptions, but also because Western society has historically and still currently fails to recognize and value wolves as individuals, like we were just talking about. Walking through the history of wolves in North America could take an entire webinar in and of itself. So I'm going to just give a general overview and highlight some of the more important events from the colonial war on wolves to the present day war on wolves. So again, the historic range of wolves used to be across most of the United States, but in the 19th and 20th centuries, wolves and other wild carnivores faced predator extermination campaigns that lasted through the middle of the last century. And the reason behind these eradication efforts was largely European worldviews that devalued and vilified wolves. Wolves were often portrayed as dangerous, evil creatures in European folklore and mythology, and that was a perception that carried over to North America, fueling fears and justifying extermination efforts. There were also perceived threats of wolves to farmed animals, as well as, unfortunately, perceived threats to wild ungulate populations like deer and elk, despite predators and prey maintaining a natural balance for thousands of years prior to European colonization. So all of these fears and misconceptions kind of collided to lead both the federal and state governments to issue bounties to actually incentivize wolf killing. And the federal government's involvement in predator control truly solidified the campaign against wolves, turning it into a systematic extermination effort. And this led to the eradication of almost all wolves from the lower 48 states by the 1930s. And in fact, by the 1970s, there were only a handful of gray wolves left in the lower 48 states in Minnesota and upper Michigan. So after eradicating wolves from most of North America, some scientific discoveries between the 1930s and 60s began to uncover the huge ecological impacts that wolves have on their environment, and an effort began to protect them for the benefit of the larger ecosystem. So finally, by the early 70s, protection was secured in the form of the Endangered Species Act of 1973, and gray wolves were among the first to be listed. And this ultimately led to reintroduction efforts in the Northern Rockies in the 1990s. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service reintroduced gray wolves into Yellowstone National Park and Idaho, and also introduced Mexican gray wolves, a subspecies of the gray wolf, into Arizona and New Mexico in the late 1990s, and red wolves in North Carolina starting in the late 1980s. And all of these reintroduction efforts were successful to an extent. They were slowly able to recolonize and repopulate a portion of their range, leading to today, they occupy about 10% of their former historic range, as you can see on the map by Living with Wolves. However, beginning in the early 2000s, there began relentless attempts by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and various other administrations to delist wolves, both regionally and nationally. And we're not going to dive into every single one of these attempts because there are a lot. But one important event of note was in 2011, when a budget rider was introduced and added to an appropriations bill in Congress by Senator John Tester, and that actually delisted wolves in the Northern Rocky Mountain region, where they remain delisted to this day. And more recently, not on this map in front of us, in 2021, the Trump administration, right before they left, stripped all gray wolves in the United States from their federal Endangered Species Act protections. And that turned over management of wolves in the Great Lakes and the Pacific Northwest to the states, and also emboldened the states in the Northern Rocky Mountain regions to actually increase their levels of wolf persecution. And this ruling was overturned in court in early 2022, about a year later. But wolves in the Northern Rockies, where most of the intense persecution was happening, actually remained under state management like it was before. So this brings us to the present day war on wolves, which again is most affecting wolves in the Northern Rocky Mountains, who have experienced over 3,000 or almost 3,000 wolf slaughters just since 2022. And a few headlines from recent years that really highlight these immense threats facing wolves in this region include the deadly wolf hunt in Yellowstone that happened in 2021. It was the deadliest wolf hunt in 100 years. And 25 Yellowstone National Park wolves were killed just outside the park boundaries, including an entire pack, the Phantom Lake pack. And this in total resulted in roughly a fifth of the park's entire wolf population gone in just a matter of months. Park researchers and biologists, including Doug Smith, called this level of mortality historic and catastrophic. And their neighboring state of Idaho also began opening up state-sanctioned wolf killing, with the Idaho Wolf Depredation Board proposing to kill via aerial gunning. And to encourage wolf hunting, the state even started reimbursing hunters for as much as $2,500 in costs for each wolf killed, which essentially offers a bounty for wolves. And then, as I'm sure many of you saw, the horrific wolf tragedy in Wyoming from March of this year that sparked national outrage when a yearling wolf was chased, run over, and seriously injured by a snowmobile, and then paraded with her muzzle taped shut into a local bar in Daniel, Wyoming, and further publicly tortured and killed by a trophy hunter named Cody Roberts. And this sadistic display of animal cruelty was met with a mere $250 penalty, the paltry charge for the illegal possession of a wild wolf in Wyoming. So skipping around to outside the Northern Rocky Mountain region, I mentioned that wolves were delisted in that region between 2021 and 2022, which led Wisconsin to open up a devastating wolf hunt that killed 20% of their wolf population in just a matter of days. And in response to this unethical wolf hunt, and in response to their second proposed wolf hunt, we successfully sued to stop the second round of hunting. But back to the Northern Rocky Mountains, where they still remain delisted from the Endangered Species Act. In response to all of this, a coalition of advocates petitioned the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to request the Northern Rocky Mountain wolves be relisted as endangered. But disappointingly, earlier this year, the Fish and Wildlife Service denied this petition, which then resulted in lawsuits filed by multiple plaintiff groups, including Project Coyote, to legally challenge that decision. And that litigation is still ongoing. We are also fighting for wolves in the Montana State Court and have been since 2022, challenging their aggressive hunting and trapping policies. That litigation is also still ongoing. And then there's the news from just this last couple of months. The Biden administration actually asked the 9th U.S. District Court of Appeals to revive a Trump-era rule that lifted the remaining Endangered Species Act protections for gray wolves in the United States. And if successful, that means that wolves would be placed under state management yet again. And remember, the last time that happened, Wisconsin wiped out 20% of their wolf population in just a few days. At the same time, Wyoming, in response to the Cody Roberts wolf torture incident, are attempting to codify running over wolves and coyotes with snowmobiles into law. And some wolves are facing immense threats throughout the country. And lastly, before I turn it over to Renee to talk about how we move forward from all of this, I want to briefly touch on Colorado, as they have been pretty frequently in the wolf news over the last couple months and really the last couple years. Colorado does not necessarily fit into this current framework of the war on wolves, but their reintroduction program does highlight the often devastating impacts that individual wolves experience when they are managed with a pretty heavy hand and a lack of consideration for their individual well-being, rather than being allowed the agency to naturally recolonize. So Colorado reintroduced 10 wolves late this past year, pursuant to a statewide ballot measure. And as of today, 7 of those wolves are still alive, but 3 have been killed now. The first was found deceased in April after what was likely a mountain lion attack. The second was a breeding male of the Copper Creek pack, who I'll discuss in a moment, who was trapped by Colorado Parks and Wildlife and later died of injuries. And the third wolf was a male that was found deceased last month, and his death is still under investigation. But earlier this year, we were all overjoyed to watch this beautiful video of pups from Colorado's first and only breeding pack of wolves to have lived in the state since the 1940s. So over 80 years since wolf pups have been playing on that landscape. They were named the Copper Creek pack. And I'll play this for just a moment. So these pups, unfortunately, their freedom to play in their territory and the agency of their entire family was pretty short-lived, as the Copper Creek wolf pack was implicated in some farmed animal losses. And unfortunately, the rancher responsible for these animals failed to implement science-based non-lethal coexistence tools as recommended by CPW, and even refused to bury an open pit of dead farmed animal carcasses that was on their property and likely attracted wolves to this area. In response to this, CPW unfortunately trapped the family. And as I mentioned earlier, the father subsequently died of a leg infection, and the mother and 4 of her pups are now in captivity, awaiting a potential release. But what's worse is that CPW later discovered that they had actually failed to capture a 5th pup who was left behind in the wild without their family for several weeks. And CPW tried for 19 nights to capture this pup, but ended up deciding to halt that operation in mid-October of this year, so very recently, due to the declining temperatures. And they also cited the pup's safety in their official news release. So this outcome in Colorado for the Copper Creek pack raises some serious questions about the state's wildlife management practices, as well as the effectiveness of its wolf reintroduction program. So I'm going to turn it over to Renee now to talk about how we move forward from all of this, and how we can have a new vision of wolf recovery given the current inadequate wolf policies.
Awesome. Thank you, Christopher. Yeah, so Christopher provided such a really good comprehensive overview of the historical as well as the present day war on wolves. So where does this present day war on wolves leave us? Wolves are being, like Christopher discussed, run down with snowmobiles, killed from helicopters, entire families wiped off the landscape, and states in the Northern Rockies are actively aiming to reduce wolf populations to the bare minimum required in order to avoid being relisted on the Endangered Species Act. So I think it displays the fundamental issue with the way wolves are being devalued and mistreated nationwide. And what's needed is really a fundamental paradigm shift. We need to shift our understanding and perception of wolves to view them as individuals and remind ourselves and society of who wolves are, as Christopher so eloquently introduced them at the beginning of this talk. Our goal needs to be to foster compassionate coexistence with wolves as members of our multi-species community, and I'll get a bit into our vision of wolf recovery in just a second. But first, want to highlight the need to change kind of the current narrative around wolves and why we should begin to think beyond the Endangered Species Act when it comes to wolf recovery in North America. The issue with the current ESA or Endangered Species Act framework of wolf recovery is that we're stuck in the throes of what we commonly call the predator pendulum. So this predator pendulum swings from wolves being listed on the Endangered Species Act to being delisted. When they're listed, they receive full protection, and when they're delisted, they're being slaughtered in states like the Northern Rockies. The status of predator species in particular tends to be heavily politicized. Gray wolves and grizzly bears are frequently under consideration for listing and delisting. And this swing from protection status, from one protection status to the other, is what we refer to as the predator pendulum. It creates uncertainty and inconsistency around the protection status of these species. And the dramatic swing from absolute protection to being slaughtered, if you remember the example that Christopher provided in Wisconsin, when hunting season opened in 2021, when wolves were delisted for a very short time, they, were subjected to a hunt that killed over 20% of their population in just a matter of days. So while it's important to note that the Endangered Species Act and relisting would provide the strongest level of protections for wolves in the near-term future, the predator pendulum and eventual delisting of the species really requires us to think beyond endangered species listing, because they will eventually be delisted. I want to highlight that next slide, Christopher. We'll get into kind of comparing Endangered Species Act and thinking beyond the Endangered Species Act to more of a compassionate conservation framework. So the goal of the Endangered Species Act in regard to wolves or any other species that is listed on the ESA fundamentally is to prevent extinction of species. But preventing extinction should be the minimum standard, not the end-line goal. So instead, we should aim for thriving, self-sustaining, and flourishing wolf populations. We know how valuable they are to our ecosystems, and an idea of compassionate conservation would prioritize the welfare of individual animals alongside the broader ecological goals. So the health of wolf families and the health of packs supports and fosters thriving ecosystems. The ESA is also species-centric. It's focused on the protection of species and population from going extinct on the landscape, but there's no concern for individual animals other than their value to preventing extinction and species level conservation. while a compassionate conservation model would recognize the intrinsic value of each individual animal, not just their role in the ecosystems or a species survival. The ESA is guided by what's known as the best available science standard. So when determining whether a species should be listed as endangered or threatened, the Endangered Species Act mandates that the decision must be based solely on scientific information without consideration of political or economic factors. Now, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, in many ways, we would argue and are actively arguing in court currently that they're failing to uphold the best available science standard. And we believe that this is the case with the most recent decision not to relist wolves in the Northern Rockies. However, outside of just best available science, compassionate conservation would consider value and ethics in wildlife policy, a more holistic understanding considering the well-being of both individuals and ecological communities in decision-making processes around wildlife. So to use the Wyoming wolf incident as an example, which was the wolf that was captured, run over with a snowmobile, and then tortured and later killed in Daniel, Wyoming. The ESA, if wolves are listed as endangered, if they were listed as endangered in the Northern Rockies at the time, would prohibit the practice of running them over with snowmobiles. But those protections would be provided on the basis of protecting that species from going extinct. The Endangered Species Act would not prohibit this practice and does not prohibit this practice because it's unethical or inhumane or cruel. The Endangered Species Act does not require compassion and humaneness or the just treatment of wildlife, right? But what it does do is it protects species from human harm when they are endangered of extinction. So where does this leave us? We need a paradigm shift in how we view and treat wild wolves. We need policy frameworks that require just, compassionate coexistence with wolves, and overall need to urge a new framework for living alongside wolves in North America to move beyond the dark history of carnivore extermination and hatred that Christopher covered, and move beyond the throes of the predator pendulum that I just covered, to a more just, compassionate model that views wolves as individuals. So what does this look like in practice? Here at Project Coyote, we have a vision of what we believe wolf recovery in the 21st century should look like. We envision a North America where wolves are valued for their intrinsic worth and their contributions to our multi-species community. We envision a North America where human communities care for, respect, and coexist peacefully with wolves, where wolf individuals are safe from persecution, killing, and other humane practices and policies, such as running them over with snowmobiles. We envision a North America where wolf populations are allowed to flourish and contribute their ecological functions as apex predators, and are allowed the agency to recolonize suitable habitats. We envision a North America where science empowers lasting solutions for mitigating human-wildlife conflict, promoting more positive relationships, and the well-being of wolves and humans that can share the landscape. And then underpinning it all, we envision a North America where compassionate conservation drives wildlife stewardship. This, we believe, is an empowering framework that we need to build 21st century wolf conservation and protection around into the future. The good news about this, I know there hasn't been very much good news, but the good news is that we are in the majority. We know that the majority of US residents support stronger protections for wolves and all wild carnivores. The minority is very vocal, but is small. We recently announced survey results that were published by Colorado State University's Animal Human Policy Center in collaboration with Project Coyote, which show broad public support for protecting wild carnivores. Just a few of the key results that I'll highlight: 85% would support a federal law specifying that cruelty towards wildlife is a criminal violation. 81% of the public would support a state law banning wildlife killing contests. 81% would support a state law restricting hunting season length for wild carnivores. And then 80% would support banning purposely running over wild carnivores with motorized vehicles. I'm highlighting this data point in particular because in a few minutes we'll use this data point when we take collective action for wolves together in the second half of the webinar. In other positive news, there have been 2 recently introduced federal bills that urge renewed protections for wolves across the US. The first is the Tribal Heritage and American Bison, Grizzly Bear, and Wolf Restoration and Coexistence Act. This bill is a tribal-led initiative that's been introduced into both chambers of Congress by Senator Cory Booker and Representative Grijalva. This bill would establish permanent federal protections for American bison, grizzly bears, and gray wolves, while strengthening recovery and coexistence initiatives for these species, highlighting both their ecological and cultural importance. This bill also would enhance recovery efforts, foster human-wildlife coexistence, and expand tribal management authority. So if enacted, would direct the formation of oversight committees in collaboration with Indigenous tribes to empower tribal-led reintroduction initiatives on tribal lands. The second bill that I want to highlight is the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act. This bill was introduced following the public outrage over the horrific torture and killing of the young wolf that we've mentioned in Daniel, Wyoming. The public, in response to this incident, has been urging action to protect wolves from cruelty and practices such as whacking, which is the running over animals with motorized vehicles. In Wyoming, the state legislature, where the incident happened, the state legislature responded to that incident by creating an ad hoc legislative committee, which is called the Treatment of Predators Working Group. And it was formed in order to address the deficiencies in Wyoming's animal cruelty laws and hopefully outlaw the practice of whacking. However, more recently, in the last month or so, the committee put forth a proposed bill that would still permit the pursuit of animals with motorized vehicles as long as they are killed quickly. So this is not what the public at large has asked for. So in response to the complete deficiencies of the state to take meaningful action on this issue, this federal bipartisan bill, which is called the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act, was introduced by Republican Representative Nancy Mace and also has 4 additional Republican co-sponsors, 9 in total at this current time. And this legislation aims to implement a national ban on using snowmobiles to chase down wolves and coyotes on federal lands. With bipartisan co-sponsorship, we've seen Republicans and Democrats alike support banning this egregious practice, along with over 80% of the broad public in the recent survey results that were published. So today, our hope is to take collective action in support of the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act. And the reason we're focusing on this bill at this moment for Wolf Awareness Week is because it currently has bipartisan support and therefore a higher likelihood of passing if we place significant pressure on federal representatives to take action. So I wanted to highlight that we're going to take action together on this bill in just a moment, but I wanted to highlight that when pro-wildlife or pro-wolf bills are introduced, it's so important to ensure that your representatives hear from you in support of these bills. So some tips in contacting your federal representatives in support of legislation like these bills. We want to be ensure to include a clear and compelling message. We will share a slide of key talking points from you to pull from in just a second, but some examples of some clear and compelling messages would be our nation's wildlife shouldn't be subjected to needless harm and suffering, or using motorized vehicles as weapons violates basic principles of animal welfare that should underpin all human interactions with wildlife. It's also important to harness a personal story and connection to the issue, why you care about wolves, why you care about this issue, why you were heartbroken to see what happened to the wolf in Daniel, Wyoming. Try to harness a personal connection to the issue and include that in your contacting your federal representative. And then lastly, use relevant data, facts, and information. So that key survey data that we shared just a moment ago, over 80% of US residents support prohibiting the practice of running over wild carnivores with motor vehicles. That's a crucial data point to use in contacting your federal representatives in support of this bill and highlighting that there's broad public support nationwide for banning this egregious practice. So what we're going to do is take collective action together. So I see that there's 158 participants. So my goal is to get all of you to take action with me in contacting your representatives in support of this bill. So we're going to share in the chat a link that will take you to a draft form letter, which will send directly to your representative in support of this, in support of the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act. You'll see that we've left the personalized section of this letter blank. So do not hit send on this until you've added in a personalized message in support of the SAW Act. It's SAW Act for short, in case folks miss that. You will have to enter your contact information in this letter, and then it'll directly connect you with your identified federal representative. We've included both an introduction and conclusion, and we'll walk through how to personalize the body of this letter in just a second. So at the top of the web page that we've just, I believe Kristen has shared this. Yes. So yeah, Kristen just shared in the chat a link to that form letter. So at the top of the web page that we just shared, you'll see a list of the congressional representatives who have already co-sponsored this bill. There's 8 total, along with Representative Nancy Mace, who is the primary sponsor of the bill. If your representative is listed on this list as already co-sponsoring this legislation, you're not going to fill out this form letter, but what you should do is contact their offices directly and thank them for their support of this bill. It's super important when your representatives take good action to follow it up with a thank you letter. So just a note on the importance of personalizing these letters and contacting your federal representatives. So we have a lot of form letters that we send out on various issues that are happening regarding wild carnivores. And it's so important to personalize these. So, you know, representatives are able to tell when they receive a handful of letters that are carbon copies of one another, but when they're personalized, they're much more effective as representatives know that their constituents took the time to detail their meaningful support for the issue. So we always encourage personalizing letters to amplify your impact. I'm going to pop a slide up with key talking points for crafting a clear and compelling message in support of this bill. Don't worry, I know it's a lot of text, but we're going to give you a moment to read and pull from this in just a second. 4 key talking points in support of the Snowmobiles Aren't Weapons Act are listed here. So by prohibiting the use of motorized vehicles to pursue and kill wildlife on federal lands, this legislation would protect carnivore species, crucial for ecosystem health, prevent unnecessary animal suffering, align wildlife policy with modern scientific and ethical understanding of ecological and animal well-being, and then potentially reduce the risk of escalating violence in society. So these are 4 key talking points and compelling messages to get to your legislators in support of this act. So what we're going to do is I'm going to shut off my video, and we'll take 5 minutes as you reread over these talking points. We've expanded on each of them with a few sentences that you can pull from to pull together the body of this form letter on why your representative should support this bill. So what we're going to do is mute now. I'm going to put my timer on for 5 minutes, and then we will come back after you've crafted your message in the body of this letter. We'll be back in just a sec. Okay, so my timer just hit 5 minutes. So I'm gonna pop back on here. I just pop you guys back up. Okay, so hopefully everyone is done adding in some of these key messaging and talking points into the form letter. Don't worry, there was a lot of questions around if we would, oh, let me turn on my video. There was a lot of questions over, people wanted the form letter over email. So we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar along with a link to the action alert after this webinar. So in case you missed it or weren't able to craft a message, there'll be another opportunity to do so. Now I want to take an additional 2 minutes. So like I said, when contacting your federal representative, include a clear and compelling message, a direct connection to the issue, as well as facts and data relevant to the issue. So now we're going to take 2 minutes to add in one of these facts or data points. So it's always a good idea to use real data and facts to support your argument or advocacy. The first point on this slide shows broad public support. It's that 80% public support for banning the purposely running over wild carnivores with motorized vehicles, which is that new survey data that came out just a few weeks ago. So that is a really good and crucial point to include in these letters to your representative. The second shows that there is strong precedent for banning this practice in multiple states. Minnesota has had a ban on running over wildlife with vehicles for the last 38 years. Colorado, Washington, and Oregon also have laws prohibiting the practice. So this key data point shows that there's legal precedent in multiple other states for banning this practice already. So I'm going to pause for 2 minutes. Feel free to pop in a blurb on either one or both of these key kind of facts and data points into your personalized message. And we'll just pause here for a sec. Okay, so I did forget to turn on my timer, but that felt like 2 minutes. So I'm gonna go with that being 2 minutes. Again, don't worry, if you need extra time, feel free to take a moment after the webinar to clean up your form letter and get that sent out. So if you've added in a personalized message using the talking points as well as one of these facts or data points from this slide, feel free to hit send. Again, we'll be able to see on the back end how many people have taken action today. And don't worry, we will send out a recording of the webinar and a link to this action alert again. So if you missed the opportunity to take action, there will be another opportunity to do so. Huge thank you. This is the first time we've done this, taking collective action together. So thank you so much for joining us and doing this and really amplifying your impact. Like I said, personalized letters are so important for contacting your federal representatives on issues like this. So thank you so much for taking collective action. We must continue to put pressure on our representatives and hold them accountable to ensure a more just, compassionate world for wolves and all wild beings. A few quick reminders, and then we might have a minute or two to answer some questions that have come through in the chat. So we'll be celebrating Wolf Awareness Week all week long. So be sure to follow along on social media, share our social media content, which will be reiterating the messaging and the narrative around wolves that we've discussed today, as well as the form letter to share with other folks to increase the number of supporters that take action on this issue. And show your support. You can also show your support for wolves by purchasing this week's exclusive limited edition wolf-themed merchandise. That's a tongue twister. It's available through our float campaign. I think Kristen has already shared that in the chat, but it will share another link again. Or by donating to our Wild Carnivore Legal Defense Fund, so we can ensure we are financially equipped to defend wolves in court. We've mentioned, 2 lawsuits that we're actively working on in defense of wolves. Our Wolf Legal Defense Fund ensures that we have financial ability to take more legal action for wolves if necessary in the future. All donations this week will be matched up to $5,000. So yeah, please donate to the Wild Carnivore Legal Defense Fund. And then we will share in the chat, Kristen might have already done it, a link to our Wolf Awareness page, which summarizes kind of all of our Wolf Awareness Week activities. So I think that's it. Let's see if we have time for questions.
Yeah, we have quite a lot of questions. Thank you all so much for your engagement throughout this entire webinar and for taking action. Renee, if you see any that immediately stand out, feel free. I also wanted to remind folks that we will try to answer some of these in a follow-up email as well. I know some of you are asking for things like links to wildlife services reporting, and if we've done any work on that, we'll share the link to that. I believe we have a link to talking points for the SAW Act as well for those that want to share that. So yeah, lots will be followed up on. Thank you again all for your engagement on this.
There's so many questions. Yes, so we also will share, folks have a lot of questions around the talking points. So in the email that will be going out, there'll be a link to those talking points and kind of an expansion of those talking points that you can use to personalize these messages. So those will be included in follow-up email. So don't worry about those.
I see some questions about coalition work as well. I think we mentioned some of our lawsuits, of course, throughout this webinar. We're coalition based. On our media releases on our website, you can see which organizations have partnered with us or which organizations we've partnered with to do some of these lawsuits. So we can share a link to our media releases as well in our follow-up email for some more context. One good question that might be good to address, Renee, specific to the SAW Act, is why is this only on federal lands?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I think it highlights the importance of like both state and federal action. So the federal bill would apply only to federal lands that's under the federal jurisdiction. So similar to there's a federal bill on banning wildlife killing contests, which would apply only to federal public lands, but state bills, which there's been 10 states that have enacted bills that or regulations that prohibit wildlife killing contests on state and private lands. So it's kind of a jurisdictional question. So the feds can only ban the practice on federal land. So it highlights the importance of getting both state and federal action on these issues.
Another question specific to this is there a time by which these actions need to be taken to have the greatest impact?
I think Congress will go in recess. I think within, I have to look at the calendar, with the next few weeks. So taking action now is great. Contacting representative immediately on this issue, informing them that it's an important issue that you care about as a constituent immediately is good. Following up with calls into their offices, ensuring that this bill moves forward over the next several months is also another action that folks can take. But there's really no deadline. We'll just keep pushing until the representatives start to move this bill forward.
Awesome. Thank you. And we also got a question about language and messaging that might be good to answer to. Why call wolf killing hunting? It's really just killing, and calling it hunting only helps to legitimize an illegitimate activity. So we've done a lot of work, or just a lot of conversations within our team talking about that recently. Renee, if you want to expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so it's a really good point. We do, also tend to try to use the term killing because that's what it is. Wolves are getting killed on the landscape. I think, sometimes we're using the term hunting because the states are saying, in regards to hunting and trapping regulations, we will use that terminology to talk about regulatory change that we need in relation to hunting and trapping specifically. But we agree that wolves getting killed on the landscape, that killing is the correct term for what's happening in practice.
Thanks, Renee. I see a lot of comments coming in the chat still, and we have a lot in the Q&A that we're gonna sort through and respond in our follow-up email. Again, that will be coming out likely tomorrow. We just need to process the recording, make sure it gets uploaded on YouTube, and then we will be sending that out to our full email list, along with a more general form for the SAW Act. For you all, I think we left it to where you could really just personalize it and take a much deeper action on behalf of wolves. For a lot of people that don't have the time to invest in really learning the details of this and the talking points they should integrate, we are going to have a pre-written form letter that can still be personalized. So again, if you didn't get a chance to submit it today, you can tomorrow or another time during the week. Just would recommend personalizing it like we talked about during this webinar. But again, that will be going out to our full email list. Please share it with your friends and family and any members of your community that might have some compassion for our wild carnivore neighbors. And again, please share our social media posts throughout the week as well to help inspire some action. And feel free to respond to our emails as well and let us know if you have further questions or insights. But thank you all so much for your support. We're at the hour now, so I think we can go ahead and stop the recording and sort through some more of these Q&A to make sure we get to them all via email. But thank you so much again.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.